Hello everybody. Are you currently on the hunt for a new, semi-sensible, practical, daily drivable car that's still a little bit interesting? Maybe something with 6 cylinders and rear-wheel drive to quell the petrol head in you, yet with enough space to satisfy the needs of the family. Maybe you've been looking through the classifieds at old BMWs and have found yourself frustrated with the fact that they are now either far too much money or clearly in need of some serious restoration work. Well, fear not, because help may be at hand in the form of this, the Toyota Crown Athlete Estate. For quite some time now, I've had a little playlist going called JDM Legends, and as a member of the Gran Turismo generation, it has been a highly enjoyable thing to try and fill out. But many are keen to point out the fact that most of the cars in that series aren't, technically speaking, JDM. Just in case you weren't aware, that stands for Japanese Domestic Market. Typically, this of course means cars built by the Japanese for the Japanese, but every now and again Western manufacturers will get in on the act and produce a special for only 1 or 2 markets. Today, many people consider just about anything that's been imported from Japan, or simply even one built by a Japanese manufacturer, to be JDM. But that, strictly speaking, isn't correct. What we have here today, though, is definitely the real deal, and it's a particularly interesting car. The Crown nameplate is actually the longest lived in Toyota's entire lineup, dating back to 1955 and now entering its 16th generation. This is a member of the 11th generation, which was introduced in 1999, and as an estate it lasted until 2007, the saloon being replaced a few years earlier. Despite its place as not quite the flagship of the Toyota lineup, that would be the Century, but still one of their higher-end cars, the Crown actually has rarely been sold outside of their own market. In fact, many generations, including this, were never even made in left-hand drive full stop. We did apparently once upon a time get a version of the Crown here in Great Britain, though I think that was way back in the 1970s, so you'd be forgiven if not realising it had ever been sold here at all. The easiest way really of explaining this car to a European customer is that it's a rough equivalent of, say, a BMW 5 Series or a Mercedes-Benz E-Class. For petrolheads, and certainly JDM fanboys, there is one particular element of this generation of Crown which is the one that everybody talks about, and that's the engine, because these were powered almost exclusively by a version of the venerable JZ-6. In fact, I would wager that just about anybody trying to sell you a Crown of this era is almost certain to mention the fact it has the same engine as a Supra. This would apply only to the Crown Athlete V, which is the turbocharged performance variant of the car, and that's not what I'm driving today. I have previously experienced one of those and do seem to recall that I somewhat enjoyed it. However, this is a distinctly different flavour. Trying to decipher exactly what each trim level means is reasonably difficult when it's a car that was never sold here. However, in short, Crown is the model. Then you have either the Royal or the Athlete trim, which are like a luxury and sport. The V then is, I suppose, the GTI or the M equivalent. Confusingly, there is then also the Crown Majesta, spun off the same platform, but actually a different car altogether. This is yet another car brought to me by the lovely Brad. I think now he must be up to about 10 of the things. He's got quite the JDM obsession, and got this because he fancied something just fairly sensible, usable, knowing he wasn't going to keep it for all that long. He sort of buys these things in batches and then keeps the ones he really enjoys, but this was just an itch he felt the need to scratch, and he's actually been really enjoying it. He even thinks it's actually fairly good on fuel, though unfortunately we don't really have any proper figures to back that up. One thing I can tell you about though is the stereo, which is excellent. It is badged as the Royal sound system, and you'll find both the tape and CD changer under this little flap down here, and it's really rather excellent for a standard stereo. The styling, I know, will not be to all tastes. Let's face it, it looks like the design brief was to copy the homework of the bloke that did the cars for Mercedes back in the 1990s. The interior will no doubt be just as controversial because it's a very Japanese idea of luxury as opposed to a Western one, but I myself like it and appreciate what it is. In spite of the athlete badging though, this is clearly a car more aimed at the luxurious buyer. And I've got to say, provided you're not expecting this to be a Supra with a boot, it's actually got an awful lot going for it. First off, we may as well talk about it, the engine. Here you have a very unusual variant of the JZ, known as the 1JZ FSE. So it is a 2.5 litre naturally aspirated straight six, but with direct injection, which was introduced in 2001. This meant that unlike its predecessor, which made do with 170 horsepower, this has a slightly more palatable 200. Torque is 184 pound-foot, that's 250 newton meters. It will rev to just over 6,000 RPM, but it comes exclusively with an automatic gearbox, here a 5-speed. And though technically speaking you can take manual control of the gearbox, either using the lever down here or the buttons mounted on the wheel, and yes, the indicators are on the wrong side, I've just reminded myself of that fact. Honestly, there's no point trying to drive this car in manual mode, it's just not what it's meant for. Getting into reverse can be a bit of a pain. I think maybe I've just not quite got the knack. There is a lot of lock on this wheel. The turning circle is okay, but yeah, compared to just about anything else I've been driving recently, the steering feels impossibly slow. I should also point out that despite this being the Athlete, the sporty trim, it has just 16-inch wheels on it, shod with special Yokohama Decibel tyres designed for improved acoustic performance. Inside, the car is a very Japanese idea of luxury, so you don't have leather seats, they were an option, nor do you have particularly fancy switchgear, but everything in here feels fairly solid. The only rattle I can detect is coming from the dog guard that somebody has fitted to the back. There's plenty of space in here too, for both front and rear occupants, and also in the boot, which is a slightly odd size, but still plenty large enough, I would think, for the vast majority of uses, including, apparently, canine transportation. There is very little in the way of leather in here, though I have to say I am somewhat in love with the seats and carpets. They are unbelievably 1990s, early noughties Japan, but you know what? I love the overall effect. Likewise, the topper to the dash and the door cards. Yes, I know it's just vinyl with a bit of pattern on it, but it's got this whole nostalgia thing going on for me. This material here, which in the Royal would then be wood, is instead a sort of darker shade and could actually still be wood, but could also just be plastic made to look like it. In any case, I actually quite like it. You've got other little touches, like the fact that all 4 windows are fully automatic. The car is very refined at low speed. There is maybe a little more wind noise coming through than I would expect, likely due to the shape of it and the fact that, unlike many modern cars, it does not have double glazing. You've got the little swing button up here, press that, and the vents on the top of the dash will oscillate to give you a nice airflow throughout the cabin. On the corners of the car, you've got these little lights which actually do illuminate, though only really visible at night, and help you place it in tight scenarios. Very common Japanese thing, that. I like it. There are no parking sensors, though handily, because it has a very sort of classic Mercedes sort of squared off back. Parking it isn't all that difficult. There is plenty of storage through the cabin. There's a glove box and a little sort of oddments drawer above it. You've got pockets for all the doors. There's even little ones in the back of the front seats too. All very nice. Just about the only thing in here that I'm not really a fan of is this headlining, which does feel actually a little nicer than you might expect, but I do prefer darker headlinings. That's just me. I know this will add to the eeriness of the cabin, but still, personal preference. Though this clearly isn't the model in the line designed to be driven enthusiastically, you're here, I'm here, and so I am obliged to find out just how well it does when you put your foot down. Performance out of a junction is excellent. The car gets off the line with absolutely no hesitation and honestly is way better than many modern cars. The gearbox is currently in its power mode, controlled by a little toggle down here that will be familiar to just about anybody who's had an old Toyota automatic. When you've got up to speed, the steering also becomes a little more interesting. It's still light, but the car is very keen to turn in. The suspension is double wishbone, front and rear, with optional air ride that I believe this one doesn't have. regardless, it's really well damped, and though it doesn't feel like the sort of thing you want to throw around a bend, it's certainly more than capable enough. I should also give the gearbox some credit, because although this engine clearly isn't particularly performance orientated, doesn't even sound that great in all honesty, if you put your foot down, the gearbox will then change, sometimes a little earlier than you might expect it, meaning you can actually access the upper reaches of the rev range. Not always a given in old school autos. Brakes are decent, the pedal is very, very light, but you can also modulate it with real precision. It's very well set up. Let's give that turning circle another little test, shall we? There we go. It's a big car, this, close to 5 meters, but turns really well. Possibly due to the fact that this is rear-wheel drive. And that's certainly something I think that would appeal to your typical BMW buyer. And after all, you have here the perfect recipe. Longitudinally mounted, 6-cylinder engine, rear-wheel drive, double wishbone suspension front and rear, which in this era BMW would not have given you. And it is just a really rather pleasant place to be. Many will also almost certainly overlook this car on account of the fact it's not the turbocharged V. But actually, it's for that I think it's the one of greatest interest. Because, let's be honest here, most cars like this, of this type, that have been brought over because people want that engine and they generally want the performance it has, so they're keen to modify it, or in some cases simply rip it out of the car and put it in something else. And when that is the case, the rest of the car tends to be a little bit neglected. This one is on 84,500 kilometers, so just over 50-odd thousand miles, and it feels like it has been really well cared for. You'd scarcely believe it's a near 20-year-old car from the condition of it. Though I am sure it is possible for things to go wrong, I have a reasonable suspicion this is likely to be a fairly dependable thing. At that mileage, and with this engine being in a relatively low state of tune, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't just go on forever. That it would never be of interest to the Fast and Furious crowd, to me, is only a selling point. And I'm told many of the people now buying these are those that already have a Skyline, a Supra, an RX-7, something else spicy as their weekend car, and they want a little bit of the Japanese thing for the daily duties. And I've got to say, this is a really, really good choice for that kind of thing. But what are you to pay for the privilege? Well, it likely won't surprise you to hear that over the last few years, the price of crowns, along with just about everything, Japanese or otherwise, has gone up. Today, to get yourself into the V, you're really going to have to spend at least £8,000, more likely 10 to 15. This will be going up for sale soon, and Brad is thinking of listing it at about £7,000, which would make it just about the cheapest crown out there, full stop. While it's not the V, it's in excellent condition, and I happen to think, you know, that's actually not terrible value for money, compared even with a lot of far more common European stuff, your 5 Series and your E-Class. £7,000 for a car like this, in this condition, is not that bad. So there we have it. That's a look at an oft-forgotten piece of Japanese loveliness, the 11th generation Toyota Crown Athlete Estate. As ever, I want to say a big thank you to Brad for bringing his car out, and to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.